That's one of the things that you'll learn, hopefully, that if you deal in business in the same way that I try to deal, I don't try, I think I'm very successful at dealing with the people in the seminars that I give or the workshops that I give, you'll be, and I hate to keep using the word, you'll be empowered, because it's not my job to be here on time. It's my job for me to be here on time. It's not my job for everybody else to be here on time. What we're going to spend time now is the embodiment of everything that I've said heretofore, and there's a lot of foundation laid, and every example that I've used is embodied in what I call the Great Western Story. And it's literally how I took $820, which some of you are the only thing you're interested in, and how I turned it into $400+ million in 8 years. Now, for those of you that know me a little, you know that that's not the only time I've done this. The first company that I started, I made it a $2 million company in 13 months. The second company, I made a $50 million company in 3.5 years. The third company was Great Western, and there were really a lot of parts to Great Western, and I made $400+ million in 8 years. So even my applications were growing geometrically: 2 million, 50 million, 420 million. Virtually everything about my life has grown geometrically until I retired in 1984, which we'll get around and you'll understand. I took a slight hiatus. Friday, July 13th, 1982, with $820. By the way, Friday the 13th, 13 is my lucky number. Friday the 13th I like especially. I met my wife on Friday the 13th. I was engaged to my wife on Friday the 13th, and all 3 times that we've been married, we've renewed our vows twice. We've been married 3 times, have been on Friday the 13th. I went public in the 13th year after I got out of college, and there's all kinds of 13s, and I don't know what that means. It might mean nothing, but 13 is my lucky number. With a leased fax machine, spare bedroom, and 1 employee. I've already told you I've set $2 billion assets for my short-term goals, and to be the 50th largest energy company in the world. At that time, Pennzoil was the 50th largest. That was pre-Texaco lawsuit. Mr. Littke, who's still chairman of Pennzoil, was the CEO and chairman. Now he's just chairman. He stepped down as CEO. And I visualized that. That's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be where Mr. Littke was as chairman of the 50th largest energy company. Now I thought to myself, now how am I? I've got $820. I've got a screaming baby who's 6 months old. I've got my wife who's learning how to trying to learn how to be a mother for the first time. What am I going to do? Well, because of my background, I knew that cash flow through a bank, most bankers would sell their mother for float. Float is money you don't pay interest on. So I decided at that time I needed to go out and get some sort of revenue generating item. Excuse me. So I thought to myself, who are the stupidest people in the United States to do business with? And I automatically said the federal government. Without a doubt, they're the stupidest. They pay $600 for a bolt, $2,000 for a toilet seat, etc., etc. I can go on and on. Now, how do I get in the knickers of the federal government? Legally, morally, professionally. I didn't know about the minority angle. It would have been easier if I had thought that through, but I didn't know I was a minority yet. So I went and I found that they bought and sold jet fuel, and I decided, I convinced the refinery named Marion Refining. First concept: how do you create instant track records? I went to an established business that had been in business 50, 60, 70 years called Marion Refining. How did I have a rapport with him? He was a retired general, former Army officer. No genius, you know. Name's Garcia, name's Lopez. Even if they shouldn't, they probably do business together. Okay. I went to them and I told them that I'm going to get you a contract, or I already have a contract, to supply jet fuel. He says, doing business with the government's too much of a hassle. They're too much paperwork, etc., etc. I said, I'll do the paperwork. I went to the federal government saying, now I have a refinery that'll do jet fuel, and I acted merely as an intermediary. That's all I was. To this day, nobody has ever asked me if I made money on that jet fuel contract. To to this day. No. Well, I made maybe $40,000. That's no money. On the $50 million I did in business, my first year I only made $90,000. $90,000. But what's important is that I knew, first of all, I created an instant track record. Because then after I got the $20 million contract, I went around to the other side of the Defense Fuel Center, through another door, same building, and said, I've done business with the federal government. Oh, you got an instant track record. He says, and then I got $30 more million worth of business, and that's how I did $50 million in business my first year. One employee. My wife would help me fill out the paperwork, which was this deep. Okay. But the important concept that I learned was joint venture. It was a lot easier doing business with somebody else, they looked at their financials, they looked at their ability to perform, not my ability to perform. I also learned, and have learned in subsequent years, nobody cares if you make money on these transactions. The KKR guys that, other than the Nabisco fiasco that's been, in the papers lately, that it's in bankruptcy and all this, nobody ever asked the KKR, and they're the big takeover guys out of Wall Street, if they make money on deals. Nobody asks Earl Lynch. Nobody ever asks. Yeah, when I meet with you people, that's all you ever ask each other. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Now I had an instant track record with the federal government. Now at the time I had blown it out of... Ed, can you turn the air conditioner up? I'm going to start sweating in the next hour, perspiring I should say, because I'm going to start to get fired up here. You have the ability to go to somebody that's bigger than you right now and do some sort of joint venture. Now, these marketing guys that are out there, a lot of them talk about doing joint ventures, don't they? That's good advice you're getting from them. You should go, that's right. But what they stop, where I would continue, you got to do a lot of them. A whole bunch of them. Dozens and dozens and dozens of them. Because then you can go to a bank, notwithstanding some gentleman said it's a lot easier to borrow the money than pay it back yesterday, which I thought was dynamite, because it is. You can go to a bank with this track record of joint ventures, and the bank will feel, or a financial institution will feel more comfortable in doing business with you because they know you have an ability to perform. They're not going to ask you if you made money on any of those joint ventures, I guarantee you. Because in the financial community, people like myself, we know sometimes we're going to make money, sometimes we're going to lose money. See, you all think, you never look at that sometimes you're going to lose money. You only think about sometimes you're going to make. Right, Don? Right. Financial institutions know that sometimes you're going to lose money, but they want to know that you perform. That's all they want to know. That's all I want to know. Not every deal I get involved in makes money. It's performance. I want to know when times get tough that you're going to honor your word. And God knows they're going to get tough. So you build up, like now nobody ever asks me, they just, of course now I've done so many transactions and so many deals, nobody ever asks me anything. I just, either I get the money or I don't. Very seldom don't I get it. Of course I always assume I'm going to get it, unlike probably some of you that go in there. I remember taking a guy to a bank a few years ago. As the elevator got up to the floor we were going to get off, I could see the bone marrow just come out of his bones. He was like in one of these cartoons, he was just melted into the floor. And I grabbed him by the hand and yanked him along, and his hand was wet. And I said, wait a minute. We stepped down the hall, and I said, what's wrong? He says, well, I'm not feeling very well. I said, well, you go back down the elevator. I'm going to tell the guys you got sick, which is true. You look sick. And so I went in and made apologies for him, and we came back another day. And but most of you walk in your banks with, like you're dying. Would you loan money or give money or want to do business with somebody like that? No. No. Bless you. Okay. So now I had an instant track record, both with the refinery and the federal government. I gave a bank float. Now I hear people complaining or nagging at the idea that, well, if I put it in this free account, I get free checkbooks, and I get interest on my money. And if that becomes important in your business career, then you don't have much of a career. Now, I know it's not vogue in the 90s to say I let money, $50 million, sit in the bank and I didn't get any interest, no interest. They'd have as many kind of varied accounts like they do now, and $50 million interest, it was a lot of money. Because I rolled over $4+ million every month. But I did it for the reason that I wanted to build up financial credibility with a banking institution, and I virtually wanted the banks in my pocket in a legal, morally legitimate way. And I owned that bank. If they were still in business, I'd still own them. And they didn't go out of business because they lost money. They got merged into somebody else. Because I was willing to make that sacrifice because I had a long-term plan. And this was the mark, and my 30-foot long jump was out there. We are too often bogged down with the minutia. And remember I told you the difference between micro and macro thinking. Minutia never made any money. I think it makes manure. You like that, huh? I just thought that up. We got to coin that one, a new Peñaism. I was willing to make that sacrifice. Because for my long-term plan, a short-term solution to a long-term problem would have been to try to negotiate some sort of interest-bearing account, etc., etc. Just think of all the times, all the business decisions that you've made based on short-term thinking. Okay. Now that I've got financial credibility, I decide that at the rage in those days were tax shelters. There are no such really thing as tax shelters for individuals anymore. But I decided that I was going to use other people's money, OPM, to help build my energy company. So I set a goal to raise $25 million for tax shelters. I raised about 20 or 22. And I formed a joint venture with $10,000 with another gentleman who owned a small brokerage firm in New York called... I forget his name now. And we called it G&J, joint venture. That stands for Goy and Jew, joint venture. And he's a Jewish fella. He's still, and he's just whipped cancer. And he lives in Westport, Connecticut. And he's a good guy. And the best salesman I ever met. And when I say that, because I'm a good salesman, and he's a better salesman than I am. He's the best, pound for pound, word for word, close for close salesman that I have ever met in my entire life. He sold me a $1,500,000 tax shelter when I didn't need it. I wasn't making that kind of money back in the middle 70s. And I said, when I have the need for a salesman, I'm going to come back to you, Walter. And I did. And if you can sell me a $1,500,000 tax shelter that I don't need, and I still remember it was at the Plaza Hotel. We're sitting in that main dining room there, the violins, and I'm having my third glass of port. He doesn't drink. I don't normally trust people. That's why I don't like people that don't drink. If people don't drink, that's where I got the habit. And he said, Dan, but you'll grow into it. You'll grow into this tax shelter. You're going to need it. And guess what? I did. But I went to him, and we called it, first of all, they said you can't call it Goy and Jew. You just can't. And I said, why? I'm a Goy and he's a Jew. I mean, what the hell's the difference? Anyway, so I still remember there was a Jewish lawyer named Saperstein. And he was saying that offends me. And then Walter says, it's not you that's the Jew in this deal, it's me. We each put up $10,000. And I learned this is an important principle. The professional fees, the accountants, the lawyers, and all the doofuses ate up our 20 grand in fees before we even got started. So I learned something the hard way. I now make all professionals part of the transaction. If the normal fee for you is $25,000, I'll give you $40,000. If it goes through, I'll give you bupkis if it doesn't. Bupkis meaning zero. And I'm here to tell you they will accept. Today in 1994, you can find professionals, good professionals, that will accept that kind of transaction. Because any fee, bless you, any fee at all is too much if the deal doesn't go through. And in my judgment, no fee is too high if it does go through, because you normally just slide the fees into the cost of the transaction. Extremely, critically important concept. So easy, it's beyond my comprehension. Yet people tell me, or I'll hear, you can't do that in the 90s, Dan. I do it every week. Don't tell me I can't do it. Well, you can do it, Dan, because you're who you are. I was doing this when I was a doofus. Nobody. Didn't have two nickels to rub together. So now, and I've done a lot of public offerings, a lot of big offerings where the fees were in the tens of millions. Okay, you know, you'll get this much if it goes through, and bupkis, or very minimal if it doesn't. Now, guess what happens? Now, just think of the psychological leverage you have. This group represents me. This group represents the other side. All your fees, your livelihood for the next few months is dependent on a transaction getting done. If the transaction doesn't get done, no bonuses, no bupkis, no nothing. Now, what does that do to both sides? It makes them work like hell. Professionally, ethically, makes them work their fannies off. Simple concept. I mean, you know, and I look at everybody's face like I just said that there was no Jesus. I mean, simple concept. It's so simple, it's ludicrous. I'm telling you, I'm not that smart, ladies and gentlemen. Simple concept. And it works. It works perfectly. So that's another thing that I learned, not too early in my career. Not early enough, that's for sure. So he was the small broker dealer, and he was the best salesman I ever knew. Okay, and the reason I wanted to go into these partnerships is because I wanted to use other people's money. It's not that I was practicing with their money, but it was the only way I could get started. Many of you will not allow yourself to do what I just said because remember I mentioned pride of authorship kills most deals when I was going through the secrets you were going to be revealed here today? Because you feel, I've worked on this thing all my life, I've got this patent, my whole life is tied up in this deal, I'm not going to give up 60 or 40 or 90% of it for the money to make it happen. That's a big mistake. And you'll wind up dying with the deal, and it'll never happen. If it's the only deal you're ever going to do in your life, then maybe that's the right attitude. But I'm here to tell you that you've got to do a lot of deals, a lot of transactions, and it shouldn't be your only. And the most important thing is to get started. So if you have to give up 60, when I said last night, if I put up all the money, I take 85% of the deal. No, that's the deal. If you don't like it, don't call me. By the way, that's my advice. If you don't like it, don't call me. There is no negotiation whatsoever. I put up all the money, I take at least 85% of it, maybe 95. I don't care if it's a box that turned crap into gold. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's an Energizer, it doesn't make any difference. Burl, is this correct? And Burl and I have done a deal or two. I mean, that's it. I don't care if you've discovered that there was no Moses. It doesn't make any difference to me. Makes it simple. Because, you know, I don't care if I'm hurting your feelings. I mean, because it's just business. Okay. So now we sell our first drilling fund. It closes in December 1982. The goal in the drilling fund is to sell $5.5 million. What's it say? $1.4 million. We had a lot of problems selling it. One, I had to go through the learning curve to sell it. I didn't know how to sell drilling funds, which we found out very quickly. I didn't know that oil and gas come up the same hole in a well. They do. I thought they came up different, boreholes. I remember giving a speech into a group about this size, and some guy in the back of the room said, Mr. Peña, and he starts talking about two boreholes. And I had traveled with an engineer who was smarter than I was, a lot smarter, knew all this stuff. And he went in the back of the room. His name was Jimmy Ford. And so I immediately knew there was only one borehole. And he was just trying to trick me and make me look a fool in front of the group. But we had $1.4 million, and then we started. We closed the deal at New Year's Eve at JPK Airport with some brothers named Nalboni brothers that were of Italian descent. and we were off and running. I rented a 223 square foot office in Palos Verdes, 223. Does anybody know how big 223 is? Small. That's absolutely correct. There were, at that time, we had 2 employees. Pretty soon we had 4 people sitting in that office. 4. My 2 partners and my administrative assistant. 4 of us. How many, I'm not going to ask if anybody's got an office that small. That's not 90s. I won't do that. He does. Okay. I set $25 million of goals, which I said. Then we hired the second fund, or sold the second fund. It was going to be a $7.5 million. We only sold 3.4. I wasn't getting much better at selling drilling funds, I can assure you that. We closed it, got a 600 square foot office. We had 3 employees. Charlie, Mark, now this is an important concept. I talked to them. This is the partner at the big law firm. We're talking about building the dream team. The partner at the Coopers & Lybrand. I talked about them both giving them 10% equity in the company. Giving. Not buying, not optioning, not leasing, not any of that baloney. Giving. The reason one of the reasons I've been so successful, and one of the reasons the guys that I've talked about have been so successful, is they give away equity in deals. They give away equity in their companies. Give, give, give. Not sell. I give away equity in everything I do. Now, at this juncture, I had a man up in Carmel this last summer get up and leave. He says, I can't do that. It's against everything I believe in. In fact, I think it's against my religion. I said, well, God bless you. Go in peace. He got up and left. All the guys I just mentioned, it's not a secret. You could, even though Ross Perot hasn't run, is it EDS or IDS? EDS. EDS for years. I mean, there are guys that will walk not on coals. They'll walk through fire and through walls for Ross because he made so many people super rich by giving away equity in his company. That's just one example. One of the happiest days of my life was when my administrative assistant, who's now CEO of one of my companies, Leanne Zacchelli, bought her house and then made extensions on her house with money that she got from the equities she sold in the company. I get off on that kind of thing. And the reason I get off on it, one reason, is because it's made me filthy rich. I don't know if I get off on it so much if it didn't. But I mean, I know what works. This stuff works. We're not going through the stuff that doesn't work. This stuff works. Okay, Charlie then immediately joined the company. As soon as we talked about free equity, he quit Coopers & Lybrand. 15 years with Coopers & Lybrand or something like that. He was just about to be made regional managing partner. He walked away. Left a lot of goodies on the table for those of you that have ever been members of partnerships like that. Didn't take him long to think. He was from Texas, Abilene, Texas, and he knew when it's hot, and he resigned. He lived on my couch in my house. He had 6 months vacation built up. Or 5 months, and he worked for nothing for 5 months, slept on my couch with my 2 Great Danes that I had at the time, Chewbacca, and after Star Wars fame, Chewie, and Penelope, and commuted back and forth from Abilene. Mark took a little while because he's smart. He's a lawyer, so he had to figure it out. He wasn't sure it was hot yet. He had to let her rub him or something. I don't know what he had to do, but he had to figure it out. Okay. We needed to create more track records. So what did I do? I went to a large company, a $2 billion company named Leggett out of Abilene, Texas, and I convinced them to be my partner. They were my special limited partner to this day, other than when I talk to people. Anybody from Texas? Anybody heard of Leggett? Louisiana Jet Fuel out of Abilene, Texas? Not important. But to this day, nobody ever asked me what a special limited partner meant. It meant I had all the liability, they had no liability. I put up all the money, they didn't put up bupkis. But they were my partner. So it was time for me to take more financial risk, but I needed a big name to get through doors. Nobody questioned my financials, which I didn't have very much at the time when I went through with a big partner. What risk did they have? They were special limited. That means on the 29th day of February in the year 3016, they had some liability, which means never. But perception is reality. I now had a $2 billion partner. And this is hypothetical, and if I was your partner, for virtually everybody in this room, with maybe one exception, nobody's going to be interested in looking at your financials. They're not important. They're just going to want to look at mine and how deep my pockets if things go wrong so they can sue me. And I had to give something up. I gave them, I think, 35% of the deal ultimately to be a special limited partner with no liability, no money, no bupkis. Did we flip already? You go, oh, I haven't said that yet. Okay. Because what I wanted to do is I wanted to go to a New York Stock Exchange member firm, a Merrill Lynch type. And I knew Merrill Lynch wasn't going to raise me money because I found out I couldn't raise money. After 3 abortive attempts of only getting 30 or 40% of my goal, I knew we had to hire somebody big to raise this money to do this. So I knew that if I had the $2 billion partner, instant track record, I could go to a New York Stock Exchange member firm. And I did. Now I've got them as a track record. And I let them do all the work. And the theory was I just came back and count the money. It didn't work out quite like that because it never does. We raised another fund, Fund 3. It was supposed to be $5.5 million. Guess what? We raised $5.4 because I wasn't doing it anymore. And I didn't feel bad. You know, the salesman on Wall Street, because I came from Wall Street, used to tease me that, well, Dan, you should have been able to do this. And I said, it's all right that they could poke fun at me. I put most of the money in my pocket, so it's all right. Purchased UK subsidiary from Leggett on New Year's Eve. Okay. I purchased the company without seeing it, without seeing the balance sheets. Now, it wasn't for a lot of money. But, I've told you, 99% of the time your instinct is correct. My instinct told me, and for women it's even higher. My instincts told me that this was the thing to do because, one, I'm pulling my joint venture partner in closer to me. Number 2, I'm getting them off the hook for something because they had a tax liability. If they hadn't sold it by December 31st, they were going to be on the hook for something. So I bought it. Now remember, this seminar is about seizing opportunities, recognizing them. I went to the UK. Oh, before I went to the UK, excuse me. We leased a 2,000 square foot office in Palos Verdes. Now I have 6 employees. And I agreed to drill 24 wells in the DJ Basin, which wasn't important at the time. It became very important. Now Mark, the lawyer, he was the smart one. He joined me, got his 10%. So now I own 80% of the company. They own 20%. And let's just say for practical purposes, the company's a $1 million or $2 million company at that juncture. Maybe $1 million, not $2 million, $1 million. Not in revenue, but in value. Now I visit the UK to assess the acquisition I just made. I'm walking down Curzon. People familiar with Curzon Street in London, right near the Hilton there at Hyde Park. And I'm walking down Curzon, and I look at they have the newspapers in those racks, and they're talking in the financial, one of the financial newspapers, and I see a company named Petronol, called Petronol, went public. So when we go back to the hotel, I'm flipping through the pages, and I notice there's a little exploration company that went public. So at dinner, I say, well, why don't we find out more about this? Maybe, I don't know why, maybe there's an opportunity. Make a long story short, this little company had less assets than mine, had just gone public in the UK. Now, we had tried to go public in the US already, but we were turned down because in 1983, 84, 85, the energy industry in the US had already rolled over and died. The oil had dropped from the low 40s down to, by that time, the teens. Nobody was interested in anything but the big leverage buyouts where you could earn $5, $10, $50 million in fees. Now, most people in this room would have given up on it then, especially me because I'm a Wall Street guy. Whereas the UK had just discovered oil in 1975 in the North Sea. Maggie Thatcher was using the taxes off the North Sea oil to help keep Great Britain from going bankrupt. And oil deals were hot. They were hot. Now, one of the reasons that I had bought the UK company is for their board of directors. On that board was Governor Hugh Carey, the former governor of New York. On that board was Bob Dyke, the father of the North Sea, founded the first oil in the North Sea. As soon as I open that newspaper and I'm sitting up in my room having a Stoli martini and I read this, instantly I knew that a mitzvah had occurred, a miracle, that I was going to put together the biggest public offering. I didn't have to Lotus 1, 2, 3 it either. Instantly, I knew this deal was hot and that I had hit on a bonanza. I then devoted the next 5 or 6 months of my life to making that happen. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to do research. Ladies and gentlemen, there are things in your life, in your business life and business career that you've experienced that you should have done. We can't go back. The important thing is that you recognize them now when you're going forward. And I don't mean to get touchy-feely here. For some of you, today is that opportunity. For some of you. Just some. Because I can't touch everybody. When I was younger, I used to try, but can't touch everybody. Younger and when I was single. Younger and single. Not just younger. Okay. So I decided to go public in March of '84, a letter of intent with the merchant bank. And I went to the merchant bank, unlike most of you would do, and I said that I've got a company that's got 10 million barrels of oil. At that time, our company had about 100,000 barrels of oil in reserve. I have a company that's got 10 million barrels of oil, and how much could we raise to go public, blah, 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 blah. He said, yes. We signed a letter of intent. Then I went back to the United States, and I got me 10 million barrels of oil. And where was it, coincidentally? In the DJ Basin that I just agreed. Of course, I needed the whole basin then, not the 24 little wells that I was going to drill. I needed 64,000 of them. So I went and I negotiated with the people that I had that agreement with, and they came into the room. Now, this is an important concept, another important concept. We sat down, and when they came in selling me the 24 well deal, we sat down, and I stand up at the end of the boardroom, and I said, I've changed my mind. Of course, everybody collapses. And I said, how much would it take to buy out your company? I mean, they fall back. And I, in my mind, had decided $2 million. Because these doofuses, that's not really true, because one of them, I shouldn't say that. We're going to have to cut that part out. These guys I knew had never seen $1 million apiece in their lives. And I knew that they would sell their mothers for $1 million apiece. And I was right. They took it so quickly, the vacuum that was formed in the room, we couldn't breathe. It was like we went through a time warp with no spacesuit. Now, some people say, and then in hindsight or later on, the guys would say, we would have taken $500,000. But that's not the point. The point is, I gave them $60,000 option. I then took their oil properties and I took them public for $50 million a few months later. 60,000, 50 million. Two of which million I gave back to them, or 1,940,000, less than 60. I opened at the same juncture, I'm opening an office in Houston, 800 square foot. I like small offices, to begin with anyway. Decided to be DJ Basin, as I just said, $60,000 option, $2 million worth of property in March. Okay, we did another drilling fund in the UK, I believe it was, because we had promised to do it. We went public on my birthday, August the 10th, 1984, my 39th birthday, and I retired. Because I had done everything I had said I was going to do. Because I didn't set my goals high enough. I should have just got rolling. But my goals were, at that juncture, all I wanted was, I can't remember exactly, $100 million I wanted to be worth. So when I had 820 bucks, that seemed like a long way away. It was. So now I'm retired. We sold 25% of the company for $10 million. This is on a $60,000 option. At that juncture, I had 70 or 75% ownership of the company. The public had, I had 60. Charlie and Mark had 15 between them, and the public had 25. Now, another important concept, perception is reality. We paid a dividend from the day one. We had no earnings. We figured out some loophole that you could pay out of paid-in capital, which I don't think you can. I don't know what you can do anymore, but we used to be able to do it. Because I wanted the perception to be that we were a widows and orphan stock. I wanted them to be able to be put in income funds. Now, when they look down the newspaper at Great Western Resources dividend, it doesn't say dividend since 1861 or dividend since 1971. It just says dividends, right? We had instant credibility in the market. We got bought up by income funds like crazy. Stock price went through the roof. Stock doubled in 5 months. Perception is reality. Nobody ever called up one time that I would see, how long have you been paying dividends? Now, the tragedy is, as soon as I left, they stopped paying the dividend. And in my judgment, one of the reasons the stock collapsed like it had an anchor on its neck. And you know why they stopped paying the dividend, ladies and gentlemen? Because I got the most of it. And that was, in my judgment, that was the rationale. We're going to show Dan. Now, all these guys own a lot of stock. We'll show Dan. We'll cut the dividend out. Now they're all worth 70% less because the stock's gone in the toilet. But they showed me. I'm not getting that dividend anymore. Perception is reality. We were a trustee stock from the very beginning. I moved to Scotland. Now, in October 1984 at a board meeting, now this is another important concept. You start off on a business plan. And there's a slide coming up that says, you know, how many of you flew here? First thing they do, they set a flight plan. First thing they do is change the flight plan because things change once you get up in the air. Rocket ship is 90% off course all the way to wherever it's going, to the moon or whatever. We put up a business plan together, and it's like in concrete. You put it in that bottom drawer there. After you read it the first time, it's in concrete. Business plans have to be adapted weekly, monthly. So in October, I changed 180 degrees quantumly our investment direction. I still remember the board of directors, Governor Hugh Carey, standing up and said, Dan, we can't do this. The shareholders have given us a mandate to... The only thing the shareholders gave me was a mandate to build a big company any way I could that was legally and morally and ethically correct. But see, the board was worried about what will the shareholders think of us. They may think we're doofuses. And these are some high-powered guys. So high-powered people suffer from the doofus syndrome as well. Nobody wanted to be on that board when we changed 180 degrees. Now we decided instead of growing internally, we're going to grow externally. Because it was obvious to me that the properties we bought were only going to produce 10 to 30% of the revenue on a discounted cash flow basis out 10 or 20 years. And I didn't have to do any Lotus 1, 2, 3. I took from August to October, drew a line, the decline line, and I'm no engineer, and I figured it out real quick. And then I went to our head of geologists and engineers, and they said, yes, we could be out of business in between 12 and 27 months. Harvard men, by the way. Strong. Good education. We changed, I mean, quicker than Johnny could get out of the Army. We changed investment direction. We're an acquisition son of a gun now. Of course, in later years, the board also, this was a great deal of debate, great deal of intellectual discourse went on to make this decision. I made it in 1/100 of a second. That quick, as soon as I saw those numbers. We are now in the acquisition, boys, acquisition mode. And that's the same way that you should be, in my judgment, if you want exponential growth, making decisions about your business. It doesn't take you forever. 99% of the time, you know what's right. You know she or he's hot. It's that simple. When I do consulting, I come into a company, unlike Arthur Anderson that comes in, 47 guys, 22 associates, 9 partners, 9 months later and 50,000 pages and $400,000 later, they give you this spiel. I go in, I have breakfast with the chairman, CEO, founder, whoever. I spend the morning with the people that kiss the butt, not directly to the chairman, but with the people that kiss the butt to the second line management. I go to lunch with the second line guys to kiss directly to the chairman's butt. And then I spend the afternoon with the rank and file, and then I take the marketing or sales people out and I get them loaded drunk. I come back the next morning and I tell the CEO what's wrong with the company. That's it. No paperwork. By the way, I get $25,000 a day or $3,000 an hour or a piece of the company. I'd rather have a piece of the company. That eliminates all the flakes. You're either interested or you're not. And I tell them what's wrong with the company. And I do just like Mr. Schwartz used to do with the Carnegie when he was running U.S. Steel. We list 5 things. You know, I don't have a, Ed, I don't have a writing thing. Anyway, what do you want? Anyway, so I list the 5 things and I say these are the 5 things, and then I cross out 2 through 5, and I said you concentrate on this one for the next 30 days. Don't do anything other than this one. And then I come back in 30 or 60 days and then we do it again, and the 5 change. I find out more from marketing and salespeople when they're under the influence of alcohol. I used to hold all my sales meetings when I lived here in San Diego, margarita hour down at some Bull and Bush. Bullies. What's the name? Bullies. That's the place. Okay, Bullies. Tom Brokaw and I used to go to that place when he was down here in the early 70s. Anyway, and I find out all I need to know, and that's it. And then if the chairman says, because number 1 may fire your brother, fire your wife, fire your cousin, if they don't want to do it, then I pull out of the deal. Then my deal, you know, reverts back to the $25,000 a day or $3,000 an hour, because then I don't want to own part of a company that's not going to do the obvious thing to make it better. All that other hocus pocus is just that, hocus pocus. Okay. We can change investment direction. It's going to be external growth versus internal, but we continue to drill. Then we went for our first large asset acquisition. We bought Fortune 200 oil subsidiary. Some of you may have heard of Whitaker Corporation in Los Angeles. We bought their oil subsidiary in June of '85. And I think it was for $10 million. Yeah, $10 million. And our team wasn't an acquisition team, so we had to change internally the people that we had. And if you change direction, unless you've got some real special people that are multifaceted and have a lot of experience, you can't do both with the same people. So some of you will not do that because you'll have to let people go or whatever. We're here about quantum growth. We're not here about humanity. I mean, all these companies that are downsizing aren't downsizing because they want to. They're not laying off those tens and hundreds of thousands of people all across the country. They're doing it for their financial survival. And if the truth were known, and if the shareholders knew, they should have made these changes 3 to 5 years ago. But the current boards of those companies do not want to take responsibility for the screw-ups they've made for the last 5 or 10 years. All this downsizing should have happened a few years ago, not now. For some of the companies, it's too late. But what will the shareholders think? How can I run for the Senate? How can... All the wrong reasons. And for the most part, that's what we have, in my judgment, running corporate America today. Most of the guys couldn't pass one doofus test. Okay, so we buy Whitaker Corporation's oil subsidiary called Whitaker Oil. That's the last one.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Now we are now in a 3,500 square foot office. We're moving up. We're coming downtown. We have 14 employees, and we do a series of small acquisitions. We change brokerage firms. Brokerage firms that represent us, not brokerage firms we're trying to raise money. Because one of the things, it's another important concept, I'm all for loyalty. You know, I take care of my own. But you should be doing business with a group that can take you to the next level. If your bank can't take you to the next level, then you shouldn't be doing business with it. If you're a lawyer, if you're doing business with your brother-in-law, unless he's a partner at O'Melveny and Myers or something, or Coopers and Lybrand, you shouldn't be. Always do business with someone that can take you to the next level. Okay. We now make our first major acquisition. It's in the manual, acquisition number 1 for $55 million. And I did it more for the acquisition of people, not assets, because I needed the people to get me to the next level. And rather than go through executive search firms, which I've used, and I've been headhunted myself, I decided to buy a company that had what I needed. Just brought them in. For $55 million. And that was in February of '86. We had 118 employees. We were now the 75th largest E&P company in the country. We went from like 12,000th to 75th. We moved to Houston. Another important concept. I don't like Houston. I'm a Los Angeles boy or a Scotland boy. And but if you're going to be in the business, and there's some industries, like if you're going to be in the entertainment business, you either better be in Hollywood or New York. If you're going to be in the energy business, you better be in Houston. So I had to make a sacrifice. None of the employees wanted to move to Houston, I can assure you. But we went to Houston. Because you have to be where the action is, whatever your industry is. You have to be where the action is. Unless you've got a name like Marlon Brando where they'll come to Fiji to give you a script, you've got to be where the action is. Okay, now Great Western was a player and now in the hunt. We did our first super major acquisition, which is number 2 in the manual, for approximately $155 million. December '86, we had 1,100 employees then. We're now the 50th largest natural resource company, and we're diversified into coal in a major way, and only 7 weeks from the first info to the closing. Another important concept. Everybody said, you've been lucky in oil, Dan. You didn't know anything about oil. You obviously can't go into coal. And we were one of the largest coal producers, independent coal producers in the United States. We had, I think, 25 or 30 mines. Conventional wisdom will tell you you can't, you can't, you can't, you can't. And by definition, that means you can, you can, you can. Now, I know people will leave here, or people are thinking right now, I can't do what Dan did. I'm not Dan Peña. I'm not gregarious. I'm not loudmouth. I'm not egotistical enough. What you're really saying is your self-worth's not high enough. Your self-concept is in the toilet with a tidy bowl man spinning around. That's what you're really saying. That's okay. Everybody doesn't have to have a high self-concept. You know, just imagine what the world would be like. I kind of like the idea myself, but you can, because you don't have to do it the Dan Peña, Norman Schwarzkopf way. Henry Kissinger is very effective, and that end of the continuum is extremely effective. Warren Christopher is the Henry Kissinger type, very effective. The new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that name I can't say, that Polish name or the general, he is a Norman Schwarzkopf, or excuse me, a Henry Kissinger type, not a Norman Schwarzkopf type. You can do it both ways. I only know how to do it this way. I'm not much for shuttle diplomacy myself. I'm more choke them in the, you know. Yeah, that's right. Of course, wake up, Zach! Somebody over there kick that chair up from underneath that kid. Okay. But you can do it. Now, just remember how early on I said you can never tell how wrong you can be. One of the things that were revealed. We're running and gunning. Everything's perfect. I'm just about ready to make Charlie CEO of the company, because I am retired. I came out of retirement to help with these acquisitions. He dies. January 26th, 1987. He's 40 years old. He's got about 6% body fat. He's twisted steel and panther piss. The guy was an All-American football player, All-American tennis player at University of Texas, and he dies. Now, to say that, you know, like his widow, Cindy, said, how, you know, there's a lot of resentment. I don't know if you've ever lost somebody close. I'm sure some of the people in the audience, you resent, how could they do this to me? Why would they leave me now? And she goes through all this. I said, what do you mean you? Forget you. I'm the damn life he ruined. I got to come back to work. Forget you. You'll get married to some moron. But she, you know, she did. She didn't marry a moron. She married a nice guy who was a doctor. But you'll get married again. I'm the one that's got to come back to work. I'm the one that's got this castle up here. And I came, pardon?
What did he die of?
Just heart failure. When they autopsied him, he had 95% of his main arteries clogged. And I remember going on 10-mile runs with him. He could have dropped in any of those times. He dropped in bed, in my guest bedroom at my house in Houston. 40 years old. So now, all this planning I had done went down with a tidy bowl, man, because man plans and God laughs. Man plans and God laughs. Boy, I had spent a ton of money setting myself up for a certain kind of lifestyle, that one that you saw earlier. I'm back to work. January 27th, that's the year, 242 days I didn't see my family. And then on top of his death, the $85 million takeout bond offering that Solomon, we had given $500,000, they reneged on the deal. So I feel like I'm going down with a tidy bowl mind myself about this time. And so, and the point here is we plan and God laughs because things happen. They just do. I don't care if you're the best corporate planner in America. And there are no great corporate planners in America, by the way. But, I mean, things happen. And yet we beat ourselves up for these things. I don't. I mean, I didn't cause that, so, I mean, I'm not going to beat myself up for it. It's not my problem, you know. It's my thing I have to deal with, but I didn't cause it, so I'm not worried about it. So, at that same juncture, we're also moving into a 44,000 square foot new corporate headquarters in Houston with 3.5 years free rent. And we did that in April, and we rationalized and consolidated that acquisition. And we continued on the hunt. I moved back to Los Angeles to be supportive of Cindy Soliday, the widow. I had 2 wives and 6 kids at that time. Wherever I went, we used to fill first class right up. 2 wives and 6 kids and a couple of nannies. We just traveled because I felt not obligated. It was the right thing to do, and I loved the kids like they were mine. Then I got her married off, though, ultimately. Got her married, 2 wives and 6 kids. I mean, it can get old. I had kids from 1 year to 14. I had, 4 boys and 2 girls. Just stair-stepped, you know. And we moved back to Los Angeles. We continued to rationalize. We continued to build a company. Next. To bail myself out of Solomon reneging on us, I had to go back on my knees with my hat in my hand to my UK shareholders. And now, this is another important concept. You remember the crash of '87? How many remember it? Stock crash. November or October? October '87. We're getting ready to do an offering. We did the first major offering on November 19th, 1987. That they told me, you can't do an offering. There is no equity, debt being raised, nothing. And I said, we're raising this money. I don't care if the market fell 1,500 points, let alone 500. And I pushed it through. I had to do discounts. I had to shave this, do this, pay more fees. That was the instrumental thing. Pay more fees. Collect less money, pay more fees. And that got it through. Just remember, when you're up against it and they say it can't be done, increase the fees. It'll be a miracle. You'll see another mitzvah. You'll see a miracle happen that somehow the management committee, the executive committee met again. Well, we think we might be able to push it through if we shaved it. Blah, 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 blah. More fees. Okay. We then changed the voting structure of the company. We cleaned it up. The KIO, the Kuwaiti government, were my partners. They're still a major shareholder in the company. People said that you can't do business with the Kuwaitis. You have Jews on the board. One of the co-founders is a Jew. That's all crap. I mean, I got the Orthodox Jews in Israel to sign on the Sabbath. True story. It's in the book. It's in the book. On the Sabbath. And then they took me to a Bedouin restaurant where we celebrated, and we drank Jack Daniel's Black Label out of paper bags. I said, does it make you feel better because they're in paper bags? Because we couldn't see, you know. And there was a lawyer named Arafat, who's the head of the PLO, or I guess he still is. And I kept calling this lawyer Arafat the whole week, and he said, Mr. Peña, you can't imagine how insulting it is for me to call me that, of that little killer of children. And we went on and on and on. I said, Arafat, Arafat, what the hell's the difference? And but we got him to sign. We squeezed them down and got them to sign, because I went to the airport 3 times. I said, I'm not staying over an extra day. They wanted me to stay till Sunday. Fees, because we were going to give $60 million to the Israeli government to drill and try to find oil there, and they have none. And a lot smarter and a lot richer people than myself, including Arm & Hammer, have poured a lot of money down that funnel. And when you think about it, here's Jordan and all these countries, just oil every place. And then here's little Israel, you know, dry. Now the Arabs have a rationale why that happened, which you can imagine what it is. They say God, or not God, Allah knew what he was doing. You know, they got a whole theory about that. And then they told me, you can't do business with the Israelis and then do business with the Kuwaitis. It's impossible. I don't know about it. Nothing's impossible. I did. And the Israelis were very good. They said, Dan, just take our thing out of your passport. Make sure you pull that out. Well, I did. I mean, I'd do business with the devil if it was legal. Doesn't make any difference to me. In fact, some people say I have done business with the devil. In fact, some people say I am the devil. Okay. We renegotiated with the Kuwaitis. It took me 19 months. Important concept. This is about negotiating. We struck a deal, really, in the 3rd or 4th month. The Kuwaitis gave me the answer. 19 months or 16 months later, I agreed on what they suggested. Because there's a saying in farming, there's a time when to bring the cow home to milk. And but if you grab at the cow right away, she won't want to milk. So I brought back the same thing that they laid on the table to me 16 months later, and they accepted it. I had to wait 16 months. And sometimes we're too quick to settle on a deal that makes sense for us. Sometimes, and it depends on the circumstances, but sometimes it's better to wait. And I waited 16 months, and they were hard 16 months because I was getting beat up by the shareholders. Why don't you do a deal? Why don't you do a deal? And then finally I did a deal. Now, in January 1989, this is another important concept, and it goes very much along the lines of conventional wisdom and how you shouldn't listen to it. In January 1989, I called a meeting of all my principal advisors all over the world. There was about 25 or 30 there at the Hyatt in Houston. And I said, I think that somebody's going to launch a takeover bid for us. And they said, this is Dan. I still remember one of our senior lawyers get up and say, that's impossible. You own 40% of the voting stock. The Kuwaitis own this, that. I said, I think they're either going to cut a deal with the Kuwaitis or I'm not sure. I said, I want us to work on anti-takeover, parachutes, and all that stuff. And we did. June of that year, June the 5th, a little twerp named Lawrence Hockey Sweeney launched a takeover. He didn't understand that I had 40% of the voting stock. Oh, he knew he had to get 50.1. We had the finest lawyers, the finest accountants, finest merchant and investment bankers in the world advising me. Little Hockey, he didn't know. When you were a kid, when you did a hawk, that was like spitting, wasn't it? That's why I used to go, little Hockey, little... Anyway, he didn't understand that. All he knew is he had to get 50.1. I had a room half full of this many people telling me it was impossible. See, the little guy, he didn't understand that. He just went out and got a bunch of money, said he's going to buy up the stock until he's got control. Conventional wisdom is almost always wrong. It's almost always wrong. Well, I'm happy to say, well, I don't know if I should be so happy to say, we won the takeover. He slid a check for many tens of millions of dollars in front of me to buy my stock out, and I turned it down because it wasn't the right thing to do at the time, I thought, because the shareholders are still, we've got these various levels of stock. You know, this company, I wanted to make it more secure before I step away, but I'd already started thinking about stepping away because I wanted to be retired anyway. So I turned the money down. We beat him in the takeover fight. I was a great hero, and glory is fleeting. This is another important concept. Nothing lasts forever. Glory is fleeting. But I was a big hero for that time, and we became a legitimate trustee stock because we had paid 5 years of continuous dividends, and then a whole other stream of institutional money was available to us because we had been a trustee stock. And then in January 1990, we did the successful restructuring of the company, one class of stock. I was reduced down to 15% of the voting stock, and I moved to Houston by the founder of Exxon's house, for Exxon Oil, the estate in Shadyside. And on September 7th, we did the last equity offering that I was there. That's September of 90. In August of 90, the Iraq invaded Kuwait. You can't do a offering when your partner that owns 30% of the company is getting their ass kicked by Saddam Hussein. Oh yeah, we can. I don't care. You know, Saddam, I don't know what Saddam's up to, but I don't really care. We're making this offering. Now, during that time, the company, we had death threats because it was in the Time magazine. We were the third largest asset the Kuwaitis had in the United States. Like neon lights to all the Iraqi bomb artists. And I mean, we had bomb threats. All of a sudden, my illustrious board doesn't want to come to meetings anymore. It's your baby, Dan. It's always been your company. You run it like you want to. Got real lonely up there. In fact, the other tenants in the building didn't even like me being there. It got lonely. And I tell you, it gets lonely at the top, boy, that's for sure. Then finally, obviously, Saddam Hussein was whipped. And by the way, Norman Schwarzkopf, when he invaded, he made not a pincer move, but a big sweeping move up around 300 miles, and all of the statisticians and strategists that were there from the Army and Air Force and Navy said, you can't do that because you're going to stretch your supply lines out. And warfare is all about supply lines. And a lot of wars are lost because of that. Norman Schwarzkopf said, you're not listening! You know? And it's like when General Patton, when he was in that famous movie Patton, and they can't get the jeeps and tanks across. Major, you're captain, you're now major. We'll get it done until we find somebody who knows how to get it done. And that's exactly what Schwarzkopf did. And he was successful, and he's a big hero. When Henry Ford, when they came to him and said, we can't do a V8. You're not listening. We're going to have a V8 or you're going to be working someplace else. They had a V8. Conventional wisdom used to say the world is flat, right? Shows you how wrong they were. Okay. Now, what we've just gone through quickly is essentially 10 years of my life. Oh, by the way, ultimately the shareholders asked me to leave Great Western. That's how I left. After all that, glory is fleeting. But I'm still better off than if people always ask me, because once you go public, ultimately you're going to lose control. Ultimately, there'll be Harvard MBAs that come out and cut your throat. The Harvard MBAs and the MBA types have difficulty building companies, but they got real easy. They're much better at cutting your head off and taking over companies. But I had already made my decision to leave in 1990. If a war hadn't broken out, I would have left then. But then after the war broke out, I felt obligated to stay on. And of course, the share price continued to fall because everybody thought the Kuwaitis were going to have to sell assets to pay for the war. And what's one of their biggest assets? Liquid assets. And the stock price just tumbled. So at that time, the millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars that I was offered in the buyout looked pretty good when the stock price dropped 70%. But see, Some of you in the room would spend the rest of their life thinking about that money that they could have had when they didn't get it. The only reason I bring it up is because it's important to illustrate that you can't focus on things that you should have done in the past. You can only focus on and change things that you haven't done yet in the future. Setting goals and objectives, I say shoot high. It costs nothing to shoot high. Nothing. The only thing it costs is if you fall below that benchmark is your own self-esteem in your eyes. In no one else's eyes, in my judgment. And if it does mean anything to anybody else's eyes, it shouldn't. They're not worth worrying about. They're just not. And I say always, always, always pay yourself first. And I don't mean pay yourself to the exclusion of everybody you work with. But I know that everything's in cycles. And one of the things that I did very right, through all cycles I've been, I've always taken money out. The reason most businesses don't sell when it's time to sell, in the entrepreneur's mind, is because they're asking too much, because they have to bleed the last nickel out of the deal because they haven't paid themselves and they left all the money in the company. I paid myself and all the way down to the janitor, big time. 15% of pre-tax profits went to bonuses for my employees. I gave away stock options and stock liberally. It allowed me to live the lifestyle that I wanted. And I didn't have to be there. And when we talk about control aspects, you're going to see that less control is more control. Your businesses will grow. We'll have Burl stand up and talk about it, because she used to be the preeminent expert at choking your business to death. She is now just the antithesis of that. She doesn't even go in the office. I call her at home when I need to find her. Always take money out of every cycle, because there may not be another cycle. Now, we talk about not setting time limits for goals and how they're really benchmarks. And does this goal-setting thing really work? Now, let's look at an example. The best example is what I call the Castle goal time sequence. I set a Castle goal in April 1983 as I'm running down by Don Taylor's house. As I kind of went by the shanties, I kind of looked out and, you know, I looked at castles in the UK in Thanksgiving in 1983. I bought a UK subsidiary from a large US company in a totally unrelated transaction New Year's Eve 1983. I visited the UK company spring of '84 and decided while in the UK there was a huge opportunity for Great Western to go public. I went back to the US and found something to take public. I made my first offer on the castle in June of '84, went public on my 39th birthday, August of '84, made final offer on the castle of August of '84, moved in the castle in September of '84. Now you tell me, was going public in the UK an accident? Doesn't matter. Would I have been in the UK or bought a UK subsidiary if I hadn't set a castle goal? Probably not. Probably not. We'll never know for sure. But a quantum leap is a move you're already prepared to make. You just haven't done it. I was prepared. I used to tell people, as I said last night, I was born ready. I really wasn't born ready. I've prepared myself all my life, all my adult life. It's a jump that you're already ready to take. Because then you won't always have all the answers, so you have to take seriously the advice of others. Now, others that you respect. Others that are where you want to be. Not doofus that's no better off than you already are. In my humble opinion, and it's not so humble, most of the advice, not all, there's some good guys. Somebody asked me about Dennis Waitley. I have a lot of respect for Dennis. Part of the reason I have respect for Mr. Waitley is his Psychology of Winning seminar in 1975 got me thinking about seminars and psychology of winning. And then, of course, he's out of the Jim Newman stable, same as I, so, I mean, there's probably, I didn't know that at the time. There are people that are out there that are dynamite. Zig Ziglar is like that old-fashioned religion. I mean, he just keeps getting better and better. But most of them are doofuses. And most of them you have put your money down with a tidy bow man. But there are good ones. There are. There are not too many of them, but there are. And I've talked about perception as reality. How you're perceived. If I think that I'm getting a rotten deal, or I think that you're treating me unfair, that's my reality, rightly or wrongly. If I'm an African American or I'm a Hispanic in this country and I think that I'm getting a rotten deal, whether they're getting a rotten deal or not doesn't mean spit. In their eyes, they are. So it's their reality. I get deals brought to me because the perception is, one, I look at them and I return phone calls, which is a lot different than most of the guys in this business. And two, that if it's the right deal, I can get it done. What more can you ask for? Perception is extremely important. Extremely important. Yeah. Okay. Now, I've been asked several times about the Mentor Mastermind Group, and as the kids I've already alluded to, they said, Dan, can you adopt us? I think I told that story when I've gone to high school campuses. The kids want to know if I can adopt them. No, and I can't adopt any of the audience either. But I want to talk about this, and this is important. And I want to preface everything I'm going to say by mastermind groups have not worked for me. I've seen them work effectively, but not for me. When I've become a member of a mastermind group, everybody sucks my brains, and I don't get much out of it. I am the mentor to 10 or 12 people, especially now with the Magnificent Seven that will still, the jury's out whether any of them will turn out to be magnificent or not. But and I am the mentor to 5 or 6 other people, one of which is Burl. And but I'm going to tell you, in my judgment, how they, when I have seen them effective, how they work. One, everybody in the group has to have different expertise. Different areas of expertise, contrary to what you might have thought. Two, but you have to have a similar level of experience. Either you're all superstars or none. No one superstar and then all doofuses. Three, you have to have geographic desirability. I was helping a group up in Connecticut, and she said that she was going to have to go to her mastermind group. She showed up the next day to her mastermind group, and there was 13, and one lived in Boston, one lived in Philadelphia. I mean, that's not cohesive enough, you know, and that's not going to work. And I've seen, and that's one of the primary reasons, and it may not even be that far away. If I live in Los Angeles and you live in San Diego, that's too far away. It's got to be in the same locale. Time commitment similar. If I'm willing to spend 5 hours a month, then everybody in the group better be willing to spend 5 hours a month or you're wasting your time. Similar time commitment. There can be no chairperson. That doesn't mean an individual won't chair a particular topic, but no chairperson. Everybody's equal at every meeting. These people that you're sitting down with have to have exhibited successful traits more than your contemporaries. Because if they're not at least more successful than your contemporaries, then you ought to be just doing it with your contemporaries, or not doing it at all. And last but not least, and this is when they all fall in the toilet, don't be embarrassed to leave if growth process stops. Most mastermind groups turn into social deals. Most mastermind groups turn into social deals. Now, a more effective, at least vis-a-vis Dan Peña, is the mentor system. I'm a big proponent of that because that's how I've succeeded, and that's how I've helped other people to succeed. The person has to be significantly more successful than you are now. Significantly. The person has to be where you want to be. Two, the person, senior person, because it's always going to be senior, not always, but almost always, you really like and respect. Vastly more experience, accessibility desired, not mandatory, but desired. Three, same field of endeavor, most desirable, not mandatory. I have 3 mentors. One, I've got the head screwed on straight mentor, Jim Newman. I've got one energy mentor, Jerry Ormond. And I've got one business mentor, Costa Gratsos, who passed away. Costa Gratsos was the CEO of Onassis Shipping Lines, and he was the head of the Onassis Trust until he passed away a few years ago. And he was my business mentor. I mean, He's really the one that, he didn't use the words, if it's hot, it's hot, but, you know, he just knew instantly. He used to have 5 or 6 meetings at a time. He'd go from one boardroom to another. No, doesn't work. Yes. Just room to room. He'd just listen for a few minutes and he'd know whether the thing was viable or not. And I've developed that myself. I'm pretty good at that. And then the last, something else in common outside business. Because if you're going to hang around with me, you better play golf. You either better eat fine food, drink a lot of whiskey, drink good wines, and play golf. That's the perfect setup for me. And like Scotland. Or at least pretend you like Scotland. My good friend, God rest his soul, Guthrie Castle. By the way, he never called me Dan, and all the time we knew each other. He called me Mr. Peña, always. Never unbuttoned his coat, always had it buttoned. Very European, very cultured man. He lost 5 wives at sea. No, not different boats. His last wife, and I think she's still alive, she was a German lady, she would never, you know, she would never get on a boat with him. He was a grand old guy. He told some stories about Arionasis that just are really funny. But he gave me this advice. He said, this is grazos on friends. Friends are their friendship in trouble, courage in battle, and wisdom in rage. He helped me more with the wisdom and rage than the other two. But he was a good friend. Taught me a lot. He used to grab me by the arm, and we used to shuffle over to Le Grand Oui, which is right across the street from Olympic Towers, where they had a building. And and I think it's good to share 3 other concepts he shared with me over the years about diversification. He said, Mr. Peña, we had 107 ships, all Panamanian registry, all cash, all paid for. We own this building, Olympic Towers, 40% empty. We wish we didn't own it. We own Olympic Airlines. We gave it back to the Greece government. We understand cash. They had no personnel department. They had no finance department. When you came to retire, you needed new teeth. They'd lick in your mouth and write you a check. They had one guy to count the money, one guy to watch the guy counting the money, and one guy to watch that guy. That was their finance department. I'm telling you the truth. That's it. They had cash flow in those days of over $400,000 a day. He says, Dan, we don't know. We know ships. We'd like to have another 100 ships. So all the rest, he says, if we could sell the building, we would. And they had tons and tons and tons of cash. I bet you did weigh tons. Okay. Now, part of this dream team, if you've got the mentor group, a mentor or the mastermind group, you still need outside advisors, which I've alluded to the whole time. In order to really succeed in business, you need outside advisors. These advisors must be trusted advisors. To have trusted advisors, you need a very special relationship with someone at the firm. You need a mole. The perfect mole is someone who is motivated, aggressive, ambitious, but not as bright as he or she thinks. I got in trouble with my trial. I was in a big trial here a year ago. They pulled this out of context. It almost cost me my lunch, almost my first loss. Because they brought up the fact, weren't you an intelligence officer during the Vietnam conflict, Mr. Peña? I said, yes, I was. Would you explain what a mole is? A double agent that you had in all these firms? Well, that's not what I mean at all. I mean somebody that is willing to bust their butt for you in a professional way, that when your job needs to be done, he'll do it over getting IBM's job done. Or at least make sure your stuff gets done first. Or at the same time, I used to like somebody that was a 3 to 5 year associate, 1 or 2 years short of partnership. I'd give him all the business I could, legally, professionally, make sure that I was help make him partner. And then I never let him forget it. Ever. When I brought that group together on that January 1989 meeting, and I had all the advisors, I stood up at the end of the table. It's a famous speech I made. I put my hand on my left breast and I said, the milk has been sweet all these years. And if we lose a corporate takeover fight, you know what happens. They clean out management and they clean out all the advisors. I've made many of you partners, managing directors. You've got big houses up in Far Hills, Short Hills, Greenwich, Connecticut, wherever, because of me. And if I get blown out, you guys are history. Well, Dan, since you put it that way, he says, well, we'll get these plans together. And that's exactly what they did. So we were ready. We were ready for June. But you need these kinds of people to get where you want to be. Now, all my people are all senior people now. I mean, because I've been at it a while. You know, when I call, I mean, I don't get put on hold. They're either available or they're not. And when dealing with the opinionated or egotistical, always give credit where it is not due. That was extremely difficult for me to do when I was younger. I've gotten a little better at it. But if you're going to have high-powered people working for you, they're going to have big egos. And if they don't have big egos, you don't want them working for you. Now, the many faces of conventional wisdom. What happens when you make a mistake? What happens, Burl? When you make a mistake? It costs you, but so what? It's only one mistake. It's not life-threatening. The consequence of a misguided decision is de minimis in the concept of eternity, or the consequence of a misguided decision is de minimis. It's not a fart in the wind in the cosmos of time. That's what I'm trying to say. No decision you will ever make in business in the big picture means anything, myself included. Nothing. I don't care what you buy, what you sell, what you produce, what you do. It means nothing. Most successful people do it poorly until they do it well. Just keep blundering. I know we got a lot of people that blunder, but just keep doing it until you get it right. And the average time it takes is 17 times before you get it right. Didn't it used to be 7 no's before you get a yes in selling? Is that still true? 7. Now, when I was I didn't understand no. My mother never told me no when I was growing up. My mother never told me no when I was growing up. And some of the girls I used to date in high school couldn't understand how come I didn't understand the word no. But it's not part of my vocabulary. I don't understand the word no. I just don't. It is not part of my vocabulary. And somebody tells me no, I hear yes. When somebody tells me no, I hear yes. Now, next time somebody tells you no to something, just step back a second and think, yes, what would it mean to the conversation? What would it mean to the transaction? What would it mean to the potential of the business relationship if you translated yes for their no? Next time it happens. Now, I'm not telling you when she says, no, not tonight, honey. You know, I mean in a business transaction, not the next time somebody tells you no. Why don't we take a 5-minute break? And we're not going to talk about theory X and Y. No. I want to do the chart. I'm going to poke some fun at it. Keep it up there. I used to ask all the MBAs, would you please line up? But I don't do that anymore. It's because then I just embarrass them. Okay.